So this is what frame 3 looks like after it's been installed. That's what it looks like from the outside. So it's riveted on either side, all the way down and all the way across the bottom, and then all the way up the other side. And the primary purpose of frame 3 is not only to help support the fuselage, but the fuel tank actually sits on the front of here, and there's supposed to be 2 brackets for the fuel tank that mount on here. I haven't installed those yet. I'm going to wait until after I figure out exactly how I'm going to frame the fuel tank in here before I install the brackets. And once we make a fuel tank and start fitting it in here, we'll make and install the brackets. And I'm planning on using the same brackets that the manual has, so we can keep things consistent. But anyway, this is frame 3, so stick around. We'll start building. So what we're going to focus on in this video, now that we're done with frame 4, is we're going to focus on the floor area between frame 4 and up to frame 1. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to work on frame 3, which installs right here. There's a support that comes across here to the other side. And we're going to work on frame 3 first, because we have to get that installed across the bottom before we can start working on the pedal rails. There's 2 rails that go from frame 3 all the way up to frame 1 that the rudder pedals actually will attach to. And so what we're going to try and do is get frame 3 done, work on the rudder pedals, or rudder pedal supports that go across the bottom here. And in the process, we're also going to work on finishing some of the supports that go up here. There's a support box that goes here, and another frame that just goes across the bottom here. And I think it's called frame 1B or something like that, because this is frame 1, and they just have this one part that goes across the bottom that we're going to install. And we may even get into installing and working on frame 2, which is actually goes across here and gets angled up to the upper part of the fuselage. And you can see, I think I've got the holes drilled already for the sides for frame 3, frame 2, and that's it. So frame 3 and frame 2 between frame 4, I've already got the sides drilled. And so what we're going to do is, even though right now we're only focusing on really the bottom panel because we've got that sitting on our form, we're going to make the side pieces for frame 3, and we are going to drill all the holes and attach those with temporary sheet metal fasteners, because with those centered on these holes, I should be able to locate exactly where frame 3 goes across, and then we'll use the holes in that to drill down through the fuselage to go ahead and pop rivet that in place. Because most of this stuff on the bottom here, we're going to want to pop rivet it in place while we're working on the bottom, and then we're going to come back and probably final pop rivet the sides together and these sides to the frames as we go down once we tip this on its side. The designer indicates that if you lay this on the side form while you're and actually glue and then pop rivet these side pieces into place, it'll give you a little bit more uniform look on the side panels, and you'll end up with less rippling or less distortion that is created by popping in the pop rivets without being glued first. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to go ahead and cut out the parts for frame 3 here, the side pieces, the bottom section that goes across here. And this is one case where in the manual they do give you an option of how you want to make these parts. So you can make this section here that goes down the side and goes across here in one piece, which means it needs to be bent like a hat section, or you can do it in 2 side pieces that get riveted together down the center. Now, right now I'm leaning towards just doing it in 2 pieces like most builders would do it, partly because if you go with the 1-piece frame here, which means you have to have a flange here, it has to come out, it has to go across top, it has to go back in, and then another flange on the other side. You can't bend that on any normal bender. And I don't even have a bender that would allow me to do that here. So the only way you can bend those in one piece is if you create a form to do it. You could probably bend the flanges on either side, and maybe you could start a bend at the ends here, but you're not going to be able to final bend it unless you create something you can push that that section down into and actually form it into that shape to finish it off. And I don't really want to go through the extra effort of trying to make those forms and frames to be able to do that, at least for my airplane. It doesn't make a lot of sense to do that when I can literally just go on my bender, create the two sides, and then do the popper rivets down the middle, like what's recommended in the manual. And that's something that I see most CriCri builders do. I don't see very many people who've gone to the extent of trying to create forms and try and form these into one piece. Now, since I'm just cutting out CNC parts and having to bend them myself, I'm just going to go through the effort of doing it the way most people do, which is the two parts for both sides of frame 3. So that's what we're going to do with that. So let me get these parts cut, and then we'll go ahead and start bending those and see if we can start fitting those in here. All right, I've got all the parts cut out here for frame 3. This is basically all the pieces that we need. We've got 2 parts that are going to be bent and connected together that go across the center of the fuselage. This is actually kind of a cap that is going to go on top of that support. And then we've got 4 side vertical parts that are going to be bent and connected together that are going to make up this entire frame, and these will go on either side of this part that goes across the bottom of frame 3. So the other thing we have here is these thicker plates. There's one of these that goes in each corner on each side of the frame, and I've pre-marked or pre-drilled the pinhole that's supposed to go through here. And what this is for is on the fuselage we've got the spars that go through here, and then we've got frame 3 up here, and we've got frame 5 back here. And the primary purpose of those 2 frames is that when the wing is attached here and the primary wing spar pins are put in, we're also going to put a small pin in the front here and a small pin back here that helps fix the wing so that its angle of incidence is correct in relation to the fuselage. So that's the primary purpose of this frame here for frame 3. So I'm just going to go ahead and start bending these parts. So I'll just go ahead and bend the horizontal parts that go across the bottom. We'll get these side pieces bent. What I did for the side pieces here, because we are going to overlap these and kind of do the overlap method, is I've pre-drilled all the holes that match up. So once I get these bent, I should be able to just drill out these holes to 3/32 and put some temporary sheet metal fasteners to hold these into their proper shape. And the same thing with the bottom here. I've pre-drilled not only the holes that are going to go through the bottom of the fuselage, but I've also pre-drilled the ones that are designed for this cap that goes on top. So once we get these 2 parts bent, overlapped, I should be able to drill out a few of these holes and hold this center section together also with temporary sheet metal fasteners. So let me go just start bending these parts, and I'll show you what they look like when they're ready to go together. I bent the 2 supports that go across the bottom, and I don't know if I can show you this here, but these basically stack on top of each other, similar to that, create kind of a hat section, and then this ends up getting screwed in the center on top. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to start drilling a couple of these holes and get these pinned together with this support on top, and that should finalize at least the initial setup of the cross support. And then I'm just going to check and see and make sure that actually fits width-wise in the fuselage and that we're not hitting anywhere. And then I'll start working on the bending the vertical ones. So you can see here I was able to drill the first few holes into this section, and it looks pretty good. Got it aligned pretty well. And so I think what I'm going to do next then is go ahead and start drilling out the remaining holes down the center of this section and finish it off. And then once we get this done, we'll be able to lay it into the fuselage and actually drill into these holes on this flange and drill down through the fuselage to locate them when it gets installed. This cap that goes on top of these 2 halves for frame 3 that goes across the bottom. One of the things I'm doing just to make sure that I keep the 2 pieces centered on the cap that goes across the top is just using a adjustable wrench and just putting it down on either side around the cap and just aligning the sides with the cap, using that as a guide, and then just drilling the holes and pinning them as I go. That seems to be working really well. So I'm just going to finish drilling all these holes, and then we'll start working on some of the the vertical side supports, which we'll bend next. I finished bending the vertical parts of frame 3, and they're fairly simple to bend. These have either a 12 millimeter lip or a 13 millimeter lip, depending on which part is overlapping. So for example, this part on the inside here is underneath the part that's on the outside. So this outside is at like 13 millimeters, and the inside one is only bent at 12 millimeters wide, just so they fit inside of each other. But that's basically how they fit, is something like this. Just kind of makes a hat section that's going to go around the part that goes across the base of the fuselage. And the angles on these have to be bent somewhat precise. The front one of these for frame 3 actually gets bent over by 3.3 degrees, and the aft section gets bent under by 3.3 degrees, so that these kind of conform to the angle of the fuselage at that point, which is obviously tapering in towards the nose. So I'm going to go ahead and start drilling out the holes that actually attach these two halves together, and get some temporary sheet metal fasteners to hold those in place, so that I can take these and actually just slip them down next to the cross piece of frame 3 and just check and see how they fit. I drilled out these two parts that were temporarily held together with sheet metal fasteners, and I went ahead and the pin plates for the forward wing pins, I went ahead and just through the pinhole just drilled a hole there and just attached those. It gives me something to clamp onto when I'm test fitting these into the fuselage. So got the right side, got the I'm sorry, this is actually the right side, and you can see how they're kind of angled so that they match the shape of the fuselage. The other one's obviously angled the other direction, and so these fit right in. So you can grab the left one here. These are going to fit right down about here, and one goes on either side, and then we're going to attach the cross member that goes across the bottom of the fuselage. Across the bottom. Let's see, where'd that go? Here it is. And that should line up with those holes pretty close to where I have them. And so this one is going to go down here, like so. And I've been just using a clamp here to kind of hold it together. So that's going to go like that. And so I guess got a little bit more fitting to do in here. I noticed I'll show you on the one over here. You know, when the CNC cuts things out, of course, it leaves a slight rounded corner when it's using an 1/8 inch bit. So there's a little bit of a radius inside here and inside here. And right now that's hitting that cap piece, which is completely squared off. So I've got to figure out if I'm going to round these or square these off, which I'd rather leave these a little bit rounded, but I think maybe the cap I'll just round it a little bit so this fits down in there a little bit more. Doesn't really show on the manual, on the plans, really what is right or what is wrong. So I don't think it's going to be a problem either way. Although that they are kind of, they're showing it kind of open around the top, like it's not supposed to be touching possibly, because this is the two bottom pieces, that's the cap, and then that opening right there is the top of the skin that's cut around it. So it looks like maybe, depending on how low I want to get those onto here, which it doesn't look like they need to be down all the way down at the bottom either. Anyway, I'm just going to have to check the fit. I suppose the critical thing is whether or not they fit along the top here and clear the top cap, which mine are right below it, so maybe they're fine. Maybe I can just drill it the way it is. But anyway, what I want to do is get the location of these vertical members set first, because what I want to do is drill and pin these into place so that as these go down here, they will tell me exactly where the cross piece needs to go from side to side, because I'm just going to center it on these vertical members once they're attached through the holes I've already created in the fuselage. So I think what I'm going to do next is just locate the center of those flanges through these holes and go ahead and drill some holes in here and just put some temporary sheet metal fasteners on both of these on either side once I've verified that they, horizontally up and down are the correct height and don't need to be lowered at all anymore. So I'll take a look at that and we'll come back when I get those pinned into place. I thought I'd just point out I did find the measurement here. So 1 millimeter from the bottom of that leg to where those the skin comes down for those vertical parts and the bottom of that doubler plate that goes on either side. So there just needs to be a 1 millimeter gap between the bottom of those parts and the radius flange on the bottom of the fuselage there. So that's what I'll do. I'll just leave a 1 millimeter gap there when I put these in, which basically when I've looked at it puts it right where this is, where the corners of this are hitting right near the radius. But like I said, I think what I'm going to do is I'll round off the edges of this and shape it just a little bit so it's not sitting on those corners. But otherwise I should be able to just fit these in there as long as I have that gap on the bottom. So I drilled the 2 vertical supports for frame 3 through the fuselage sides on both sides here. And of course, I had pre-drilled the fuselage, so these holes were already in the fuselage, at least at 16th inch size. And I used the same trick that I've done in the past, where on the back side of this flange here, I put a piece of blue tape and I measured 6 millimeters in, because these are supposed to be basically centered on these 12 millimeter flanges. So 6 millimeters in, I just drew a line. And then I was able to just put this frame up here, and from the outside I was able to just shine a light until I saw that line on the blue tape centered with the hole, and I was able to just drill in to the flange and put a temporary sheet metal fastener in there. I just did it on both sides on the top, and then I did one each on the bottom, and then I just drilled down the holes in between. So now I've got the vertical supports in here held in with temporary sheet metal fasteners. Because this was all done on the CNC machine, this should all be exact. These vertical members are exactly where they need to be. And then I haven't drilled any holes between the vertical members and the horizontal member of frame 3. This is just sitting in there clamped in between the vertical support on either side, so this can't move. It's exactly where it needs to be. And the reason I did that is that now I have all of the rivet holes marked or pre-drilled with 16th inch holes in this horizontal support. So now what I can do is, once I've made sure that this is the correct width, because this kind of compresses because it's 2 pieces of metal connected together, I just need to basically draw a center line down between here. And I think what I'm actually going to do here is just put some blue tape on either side, which tells me exactly where that is lying right now. And then what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll measure a center line from the tape, and then I'll measure out from there the distance that these holes should be separated by, whatever that distance is, and draw a line all the way across the center of the fuselage, so that when I put this back in here like this, I can just make sure that I see that blue line between these holes, and I'll drill these holes down through the bottom of the fuselage and go ahead and put some temporary sheet metal fasteners in there. And that'll then determine exactly where this piece goes, because it's being determined whether or not it's straight across here based on these vertical supports on the side. And of course I did go back and measure from here to center here to the front of the spar box in different spots to make sure that it's not turned or anything, but there's really no way it can be, especially with these vertical members where they're supposed to be, which I have verified that also. So this will just be a pretty easy and quick way of just getting these holes all drilled in this bottom piece. And according to the manual, we can and should permanently attach this bottom support to the bottom of the fuselage, riveted in place permanently, because the next step after that is to work on the pedal rails that go from the front of this all the way to frame 1. And that's what we're going to work on afterwards, after we get this fixed in place. I started to try and do the alignment process on this horizontal part that's going across the bottom for frame 3. And what I ended up doing is I took this off and I put a piece of blue tape underneath each end of the horizontal part that goes across there, and I lined it up with the first set of holes on each side of each flange of the angle on the bottom there. And what I did is I just used the C-clamp to just make sure that I could pull together this horizontal support to where it should be wrapped around the the base part. And you can see there what I was trying to do is get rid of any gap here and get rid of any gap on the other side so that I could simulate this being all riveted together so that I could pull these angles tight. And what I did is I just used a ballpoint pen to put a mark through that first hole onto the blue tape underneath on each side so that I can pull this all apart, and then I can see, first of all, how far apart those holes are and how close they are to where they should be for the plans. But I want to be able to draw a line from each one of these holes on the end all the way across so that I can get this not only in here straight, but get these angles positioned properly so that it's not bowed out or bowed in too far. I want to get a nice straight line to be able to drill these out, and once I draw a line across there, I'll be able to see it through the rivet holes I have already here in the flange. I can just pull the flange over, line it up, and drill through the fuselage. Now, what I decided I did here is I'm actually getting a step ahead of myself, because what I really should do at this point is completely finish this lower part here. In other words, I need to countersink all the holes on the top that are in between the vertical supports. Those all get countersunk 3/32 rivets. The holes that are actually underneath the vertical support here just get a universal head rivet. But I need to finish this up and actually get this alidined and riveted so that I can set it in here as one unit, and I don't have to worry about it moving around quite as much when I'm trying to draw the lines and so forth. It makes more sense to have that done. It even makes more sense to even have this done on either side. I could get these finished, riveted together, then take these three pieces in here, just set them in here already complete, and then align and drill the holes through the bottom support here. I think that makes more sense, because the only thing we're not going to do right now is final rivet this to the fuselage here. We're going to final rivet it to the bottom, and we're not going to final rivet the bottom of this support and these plates to the horizontal, because the manual kind of says maybe we should wait to do that until we can lay the fuselage on its side and get these upright supports aligned with the curvature of the fuselage. I'm not so sure that's the right thing to do. I don't really know. I mean, I could take these horizontal supports out and I could square these up and drill them, but maybe it makes more sense not to worry about getting it perfectly square outside of the fuselage and just make sure that it's square in the fuselage, because obviously we've got other frames that are going to go in here too for the sides, and it might make more sense to just kind of do all the side stuff at once like it recommends and do all the bottom support stuff separately. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Take this part, alidine, finish, and rivet this horizontal piece together, and probably work on getting these sides supports finished also. Then we'll come back and worry about drilling out the bottom of the fuselage. So I went ahead and countersunk the rivets in the cap that goes across the bottom of frame 3, and I've got the sides for that bottom section all ready for alidine and riveting. I started to work on these next, and what I'm just trying to do is get these plates all drilled on both sides. Those get glued into place, and most of the rivets that go in here are 1/8 inch rivets. I've only drilled them to 3/32 at this point, but I'm just going to continue to finish drilling these out and prepping these to get these ready for alidine also, just like the bottom section. I decided I'm going to go ahead and finish these side pieces individually, finish the bottom separate, and then put this all back in the airplane and check its fit and start aligning the holes for drilling through the fuselage. And let me think here. The only other thing I'm checking is I have to make sure that these are as square as possible and that the angles are bent right and that they sit flat. Make sure none of these lips are bent too far or not quite enough to where it's not going to fit flush with the fuselage. This one you can see I've got to bend this one a little bit more at the top. The angles aren't quite right, and then I got to make sure that this one again fits flat once the box section here is squared up a little bit. So I'm just going to keep drilling all these out, get this all prepped for alidine, and I'm going to go ahead and alidine all these parts, and then we'll start riveting these together. This gets, from what I understand, this gets all pop rivets, and then the plates get glued on either side of these frames here. That doesn't get glued at all, but gets riveted with the solid rivets. So I'm going to keep working on this, and we'll come back and look at it in a few minutes. I finished drilling out all of the holes on the vertical supports for frame 3, so I've got everything drilled out to 1/8 inch, and so I've got all the angles also kind of straightened out, and I double checked along the back side here to make sure that these flanges here were flush with each other, so at least when they go into the fuselage, they got a shot at being at least matching the sides of the fuselage as straight as possible. Hopefully they'll pull in a little bit where they need to, but I just didn't want to have any gaps. Sometimes you can end up with a little bit of a ripple if it either has to pull in too much, or maybe it's bent a little bit too far, and then you put the pop rivets in there and you get a bump in between. So anyway, those look good. So what I'm going to do is tear these down and go ahead and clean all these up with Scotch-Brite, get all these ready to allodyne. I'm just going to allodyne all these parts next, so that I can prepare for final riveting. I just finished allodyning all the parts for frame 3. What I'm going to do now is this horizontal part of frame 3, the bottom of frame 3, this gets solid rivets that just get put into there. So I think I'm going to set up and rivet the solid rivets into the base part first. Then what I'm going to do is come back and I'll glue these plates on, and go ahead and pop rivet these together, because the sides just get pop riveted together. And then we should be done with the riveting parts of the frame itself. And then what I'll do is I'll probably stick this back in the fuselage and start marking for drilling the holes through the bottom of the fuselage. So let me get this set up for riveting, and I'll record riveting that. That shouldn't take very long. So I'm probably gonna have to back rivet everything with the heads on here flipped over on a flat surface, and then getting my flat rivet set down into this channel. That's what I'm assuming I'm gonna have to do. So let me set that up and we'll start doing some riveting. All right, I'm starting to install these solid rivets here, the countersunk ones for the bottom part of frame 3. Mr. Columban has me modifying my tools again. So what I had to do is I'm pounding these backwards. I'm just putting in a flush rivet on the front, setting it upright on this steel block, and then I'm just using a flat rivet set that I've had to grind down to fit down in between here. And I'm just going to go down and pound all of these in. I think what I'll end up doing is I'll have to get my board out that has my has the ability to insert my rivet set into it, so that I can do the 3 on the end here, which don't have to be countersunk. So I need a universal head rivet set to put those in. So I'm going to do all these first, and I'll come back and I'll get my tabletop and insert my my universal rivet set head or rivet head set into the table, and get these last 3 on each end. All right, riveting that worked out pretty well. It's turned out real nice. So what I did too is I went back with this flange here, and I just kept moving it a little bit until I got this thing to sit perfectly flat. I want to make sure that there's no bubbles or unevenness with that flange when I go ahead and install that in the fuselage. So the next thing we're going to do is I am going to glue these plates onto the vertical parts of frame 3. And so what I'm going to do is glue these on and then put in the pop rivets that attach just to this. I'm not going to obviously do the 4 here at the bottom that are going to go through into that cross piece. So we're just going to glue these in here and get these rivets in here held into place. I might have to use some temporary sheet metal fasteners though while that dries. I didn't think about that. I was hoping to actually start fitting these things into there once this was done. But I think what I'll do then is I'll go ahead and glue all these together, and I'll get the sheet metal fasteners that need to get installed into here. I'll put temporary sheet metal fasteners where we're not going to put in the rivets quite yet. And then I will go ahead and pop rivet the edges of these together because these need to be attached together. And then I'll just let them sit overnight, and I'll come back tomorrow and I'll start fitting this back in the fuselage with the side pieces, and we'll go ahead and get all these holes drilled for the bottom so that we can get this permanently attached. I'm still thinking that I have an angle drill, of course, which I've shown before. I don't think I can get my angle drill down in the bottom of the fuselage and be able to get these rivet holes in the end of here. There isn't enough clearance. I need 3/8 of an inch to the center of the hole to the edge of my angle drill. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do here. I might actually attach these to the bottom piece at the same time that I rivet this to the bottom. So I might drill everything, get it all into place, make sure these are square, and install frame 3 completely. I just don't think there's any other way I can do it because there's no way I can drill those after the fact. So let me set up and get these at least glued together. We'll figure that out when we start fitting this together in the fuselage before I permanently attach the lower part of frame 3. I finished pop riveting these vertical supports together for frame 3. Got both of them done, and I'm just going to leave the temporary sheet metal fasteners in here because I glued these plates on the end. And I'm just going to let these sit overnight, and then we'll come back tomorrow. We'll refit all this back into the fuselage and check the fit again, and I'll make the decision if I'm going to actually drill these holes into the support here that goes across the center. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with that yet, but these look good. Yeah, so we'll get back to this tomorrow. So I went ahead and reinstalled the bottom support and the 2 side supports that we glued and riveted yesterday, and I double checked the centering of this and the distance away from frame 4 and made sure it's centered with the holes. Everything looks great, so I should be able to go ahead and drill these holes out on the bottom of this frame 3 support. And of course I've already drilled the holes in the sides, which we did before, to center this across the bottom. Now I'm trying to figure out exactly the order in which I'm going to rivet this into place and rivet the corners here and final rivet the sides. The manual has some different suggestions about how to do this, and I'm finding some difficulty in trying to follow those instructions, because it says if we have a right angle drill, we can go ahead and drill the holes into the bottom here through the bottom of the fuselage, and we can permanently pop rivet this into place. But that we're not supposed to permanently pop rivet the sides in here because we're supposed to come back once we set this on its side, and we're supposed to install this while it's on its side, and then go back and drill the 4 holes on either side and the bottom there. I think you can probably see them over here a little better. Those 4 rivet holes down there. We're supposed to rivet, final rivet those when it's laying on its side. Now that causes a lot of problems. Number one, once it's laying on its side, I can't get temporary sheet metal fasteners through this to hold it into place. They'll be sticking out the other side. When it's laying on its side, it doesn't necessarily mean that the bottom and the side are exactly 90 degrees from each other. It just means that the shape of the side is correct. So I'm looking at this going, well, I've already got the shape of the side fixed across the bottom. It's where these angles are, and it's where the bottom meets. I already have the top skin with some holes drilled into it, held in with temporary sheet metal fasteners. I know that that is perfectly following the curvature of the fuselage, and so the only thing that I could have happen here at this point is this acting like a parallelogram where the top is over and the sides are not perfectly parallel with one another, or at least parallel with one another but not 90 degrees from the bottom or the top. So it could be just going this way or this way. So I've checked that though, because I've got the skin lining up here on both sides. Frame 4 is already in, it's already solid, it's not moving. And I can move the back here a little bit like this, which actually does move this up here, as you can see, a little bit. And I really at this point should have frame 7 installed, but I didn't want to install frame 7 until I got all of this or at least part of this, secured so this wasn't going to twist when I went to put the tail on, because I didn't want to get these skins in the back misaligned or have them aligned when I drilled it, but then because of all the stuff I'm doing up here and moving stuff around and gluing and riveting, that all of a sudden I go to put the tail on, it doesn't fit anymore, it doesn't line up, or it's twisted. So just trying to figure out how the best way to do this. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the bottom here drilled, get all the holes in there. I can get my angle drill into the 4 holes on the back of each side because of the curvature of the fuselage. The angle drill will fit in there and drill those holes. On the front side, I can really only get 1 hole without the angle drill being at more of an angle than I really want to drill those at. In other words, it's drilling a crooked hole. I don't really want to do that. So I think what I'm going to do is drill some of the holes in the back here with it as squared as possible. I might drill the 1 hole in the front. I'm going to take the whole thing out, and then what I'm going to do is use my square like I did with frame 4 and just double check with the rivets in place, or with temporary sheet metals in place, how square are these 2 sides, and then go ahead and drill the rest of the holes in there once it's perfectly squared up. So at least when I know, again, when I put it back in here, it's square, it's where it should be, and there's no reason that these sides shouldn't continue to line up like they do on either side, and that should be the best way to do this. Because then I think what I can do is then just pop rivet the whole thing in. There's no reason to wait. We don't have to take it out. We don't have to get into there to do anything else. The only concern is if the curvature of the fuselage is staying the way it should be. But I just feel like waiting is going to cause me more problems than just doing this now and getting it completely installed. I don't see any drawbacks to doing it. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Now, I did have the tape down in here, underneath here. So what I'm trying to do is just mark the first hole location on either side, and then I'm going to use that to just put tape and draw a straight line so that when I go to drill through on this flange, that it does flex a little bit, it follows along a straight line for the rivets that go on the bottom. I do have to bend this flange a little bit more. It is sticking up on this side a little bit. It's nice and tight on this side all the way across, but I bent this flange a little bit too far, so I'm just going to use my hand when I take it out and just bend this back, because I'm finding out with these flanges on the sides of these frames, it is quite important that those be as close to the curvature of the fuselage, because once you put those into place, if the pop rivets have to pull that material and pinch it together, it's going to, on the outside of here, leave a little bit of a ripple on the skin where the tension is, and I did notice it on mine, even here. There's a little bit of a dished in look between these sets of rivets because I left those a little bit angled so that it would pull it tight, but unless the skin on the either side has enough tension to pull it back, you're going to see a little bit of waviness here, which ideally you don't want. Now, that's part of the reason that the designer is saying, hey, if I were to take this frame here on either side, the vertical part, I could glue this into place, let the glue dry, and then final drill the rivets and put the rivets in. The rivets then won't pull the skin into a ripply affected shape. Again, I'm not sure I want to do that. I could glue these into position here and just use temporary sheet metal fasteners. Maybe that's good enough. Let it dry, come back tomorrow, drill them out to 1/8 inch and put the pop rivets in, and maybe that would be the better way to go. I might actually think about doing that. At least then on the side skin here, I will have made it so that that's as uniform looking as it can be. He never gave me that suggestion on doing that on frame 4, although certainly could have. I don't see why he couldn't have glued that in there, held it into position, and come back, drilled the rivets. I'm not sure I would have wanted to do that with the complexity of getting this installed, but anyway, I think from here forward, there's only one other frame. It goes right here where these holes are. That's frame 2. That's the only other riveted frame on the whole outside of the skin here. So we've got this, at least forward of frame 4. So we've got this one here, we've got frame 3 here, got frame 4, got frame 5, 6, and 7. So there is more on the back side here. So I might do that. I might just go ahead and leave this overnight tonight with temporary sheet metal fasteners in it, leave it at the 330 seconds with glue on them, come back tomorrow, drill them, and rivet it together. But as far as getting these corners done, I'm going to get these corners done at the time when I glue it. So when I glue it, I'm going to make sure I pop rivet those at the same time, just leave it sit overnight, and then come back tomorrow and rivet it. It's probably a little bit more work than I probably need. I probably should just pop rivet it, but I'll make the decision before I leave today what I'm going to do. But let me get this bottom support drilled all the way across, marked, and we'll at least get that part done. and then we'll get the corners drilled and get that held in with temporary sheet metal fasteners. Then we'll decide what we're going to do. So I just noticed one thing I need to fix here that I thought I'd point out. The skin of this flange here is not pulling exactly tight on the bottom here against the skin, and part of the reason for that is that I didn't drill all of the bottom holes here around here. So there's supposed to be a rivet at the very bottom of that those flanges that stick out on the other side, and then there's supposed to be a rivet on either side of this pin attach hole, which actually needs to be widened out at some point. Once we get the wings set up in here and we're lining these up with this hole, we'll actually widen this out. But the rivet that goes to the front side of this hole actually has to be moved slightly inward towards the hole in order to not hit the leading edge of the wing that attaches here. So it's one of the reasons I left these rivets out, because I wasn't exactly sure where they needed to go, and until the wings are fit into place, I'm not sure that these two rivets should really be put in, but the bottom two I can put in. So I think what I'm going to do is take these frames out and just drill a hole through the bottom of that frame, and then from the inside drill it back out so that I can get temporary sheet metal fasteners in here, especially if I'm going to actually glue this in and hold it in with temporary sheet metal fasteners overnight and then rivet it afterwards. I need to be able to get these two, the skins right down here, make sure they're pulled tight against the fuselage on both the front and the back and on either side. And part of it seems to be there might be just a little bit of flex here between the lower angle and going up the side, so we do want to make sure that gets pulled tight if we're going to glue it for sure. So I'm going to take each one of these out, drill the two bottom holes on each side, and then put them back in, and then I'll start drilling across the bottom. All right, so I got the lower rivet holes drilled in 3/32 size for both of these vertical supports. Now they're pulled nice and tight on the skin, so I feel comfortable gluing these in place later on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drill 2 holes on the back side where this angle is, and 1 on the front side, just to lock this into its location as far as side to side on this. And I'm going to do that on both sides before I actually start drilling these holes across the top, because I'm going to put some temporary 1/8 inch sheet metal fasteners in there to pull this thing apart, make sure it's tight against this, so that when I start drilling across here, I've got that, at least on this end, at the right width, and it's not being squished together or anything. So I'm going to do that real quick. And then what I'm going to do after I get all the initial holes drilled across the bottom is I'll pull this all out, and I'm just going to double check square against the 3 holes that I have in there. I'll still have a little bit of leeway to fix things if it's off, too much. It shouldn't be, because this is where the fuselage is staying. It should go. So let me get the temporary sheet metal fasteners in on either side on the bottom here, bottom 2 corners. Then I'll go ahead and drill across the center with the 1/16 inch holes, and then I'll actually flip this over and drill from the back side up to the actually, what I'm going to do is drill these to 3/32 through this side so I can get temporary sheet metal fasteners in here. Then I'll flip it over, and then I'll drill from the outside with the 1/8 inch ones back in. So let me get these corners drilled so I make sure that those don't move. The other thing I did here too is I did take a ruler across the skin here, and just look for any gaps, and made sure that down here at the bottom where the angle is, that I wasn't creating a place where it was pushing it out. I actually have a gap up here at the top, so I do need to look and see if I need to angle that back a little bit more, which according to this I do. So I'll make sure I square that all up before I drill those corner holes. So let me get drilling here, and I'll show you what it looks like when they're done. So I drilled 2 in the back, 1 in the front, as I mentioned. Went in and drilled those out with my angle drill, got those on both sides. And prior to doing that, what I did is I attached a couple more sheet metal fasteners out the end here for this top skin, just to make sure that I could keep this sides perfectly aligned with the top on each side. So went ahead and did that, looks good. So now I'm going to go ahead and start drilling out these holes here. Now the end ones down here in the corner I can't get to. I can't get my drill in there, so what I'll do is I'll drill out all the other ones, then I'll take the side support out. I'll be able to drill those from the top with the rest of these sheet metal fasteners holding this in place. And once we get the 3/32 size with the temporary sheet metal fasteners in here, I'll probably flip it over and drill from the outside back in once this is all in the right spot. And then we're pretty much ready at that point to pop rivet this in permanently, and prepare to glue the sides in, as I mentioned we're going to do. But prior to that, I'll take this whole frame out. I'll connect these 3 pop rivets on either, or 3 temporary sheet metal fasteners on either side, and I'm going to double check the squareness of this entire thing before I put it back in here and drill the rest of those holes. Okay, so hopefully you can see there I've got the holes now drilled in the bottom of the fuselage, just to the 3/32 side. In the middle, the 4 end ones down here and the 4 end ones down here, I just drilled 16th inch holes. Once I get the supports back in here and get them clamped to the sides, I'll drill those from the bottom side back through everything. So this looks pretty good. And I think what I'm going to do to install this here, well, let me show you over here first. So I was able to get the frame out and put the pins back in, temporary sheet metal fasteners back in, and what I wanted to do is check and see how level this ended up being. And so what I decided to do is, as long as you've got what you know is a flat surface, a flat bench, it's actually easier just to run your square from the other direction and come up against it. And you can see it's actually absolutely perfect. I can't get it any better than that. And it's basically like that on both sides. So since I know this is square outside of the airplane and the airplane itself is square, what I'm going to do is drill through the rest of the holes. So there's 8 on each side. So I'm going to drill through the rest of the holes that I didn't drill through yet, so I can actually drill this outside of the airplane, have it so I can pin it together. And then what my plan is to come back over here, and what I think I will do is put everything back in the airplane, hold the sides together with temporary sheet metal fasteners, but then I'm going to permanently rivet in the corners so that they're locked in. Then what I can do is flip the airplane over, and from the outside I'll drill out all of these holes on the bottom, and we'll go ahead and final rivet that from the outside, obviously, to the 1/8 inch side with the corners already attached. I think that's the best way to make sure that this actually gets in here completely square and stays aligned when we're actually final riveting it. So yeah, so anyway, what I'm going to do is go ahead and drill this out, and then I'll get this back into the airplane, and then we'll final drill everything and start riveting. All right, I put frame 3 back in and just held it in along the sides with the temporary sheet metal fasteners. Also put some into the corners of the vertical and horizontal parts. And then from the outside, I went ahead and connected the bottom with the temporary sheet metal fasteners all the way across. So what we're going to do is take each one of these out one at a time and drill it out to an 1/8 inch, and then replace the sheet metal fastener with an 1/8 inch temporary sheet metal fastener. And once that's done, we should be able to pull it back out and start preparing for final gluing and riveting. So I finished final drilling the bottom of frame 3 from the bottom of the fuselage to the 1/8 inch size drill. And so what I'm going to do now is take all of it apart again one more time, just to clean out underneath where I just finished drilling, to make sure there's no residual aluminum chips underneath where we're going to rivet. Then what I think I'm going to do is just put the centerpiece back in here, and I'll just get that pop riveted into place while it's upside down, and then I'll flip it back over. Then we'll reinstall the side pieces here and glue those in, and then at the same time we'll pop rivet the corners. And then we should be able to just leave it overnight, come back tomorrow, and we can simply just drill these out to an 1/8 inch and pop rivet those in. All right, I've got all the rivets now installed on the bottom for frame 3. So I think we're now ready to flip it over. Now, one of the things I just remembered as I was putting in, of course, the last couple rivets on this is I forgot to install the little bracket that's supposed to go on frame 3. And it's not a big deal. We'll just add it here afterwards. But it's this little bracket here that just gets bent around the base of frame 3, and then it's got a little nut plate that gets installed in it. I can't remember exactly what attaches to that. So after checking the manual on the bracket that I was talking about, it's not a flight control bracket. It's actually a bracket that's designed to hold the fuel tank, and there is supposed to be one installed on each side. So there's supposed to be one here and there's supposed to be one over here, and it's a way for a bolt to go down through that little nut plate to secure the gas tank in the front, which actually sits across this support piece here on frame 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to worry about installing that right now because we haven't made a fuel tank yet. I'm a little bit concerned that when I go to make the fuel tank, I want to have as much room in here as possible to work with, and if we need to redo something for brackets or something like that, I'll worry about that at that time. It's not going to be any harder to install those brackets later than it is now. Obviously, I'll try and use the same bracket location as what the designer did, but since we haven't, like I said, formed or made a fiberglass fuel tank yet, I want to be able to get in here and have a little bit more room without the brackets being in the way. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take both sides and I'm going to mix up some glue, and we're going to go ahead and glue on the back side here of both the support frames for frame 3. I'm going to go ahead and pop rivet the 8 rivets on each side down here in the corner, and we're just going to leave this overnight to dry, so that then we can come back tomorrow and we'll go ahead and drill all of these holes out to an 1/8 inch and go ahead and put pop rivets in after that, and we'll see if it makes the skin a little more uniform as it says in the manual, which I think is probably a good idea. We'll probably end up doing that also with frame 2 here, because this one's a little bit of a complex curve here, because it does have to curve to the shape of the fuselage, which, vertically it's straight, but across here it's going to be curved. So when we do that, we will probably do the same thing. All right, so let me mix up some glue and I'll get ready to pop rivet the vertical supports into place. So I was able to get the right side glued into place and held on the outside with the temporary sheet metal fasteners. I went ahead and riveted the bottom corners on both sides of the left side here, and I'm going to go ahead and prepare to install the right. Well, I got the other side installed for frame 3, and this came out really good. I did put the top back on since I do have glue on these joints in here. I put the top back on and I drilled out a few more of the sheet metal fasteners just to keep this top part all in line. It's falling that way anyway, but I figured, well, might as well hook it together while the glue is drying. So I've got, I'm just going to run around here. I'm just going to wipe that bead off that's coming out the edge. There's just a little bit of glue coming out of there, but I got a nice tight seal on both sides, so riveting that tomorrow should be pretty easy. So I'm just going to let this dry overnight. We're going to come back tomorrow and we'll go ahead and drill all these holes out to 1/8 inch, get those rivets installed, and we will be done with frame 3. So this sat overnight. The glue has set. So what I'm going to do now is just take one of these sheet metal fasteners out one at a time and drill each hole out to an 1/8 inch, and then go ahead and just put a pop rivet in there, and then this should be done. So let me pop rivet this together real quick, and we'll look at the skin and see what it looks like when it's done. I finished the riveting on the outside of the skin on frame 3. It looks okay. I think maybe the glue might have helped a little bit. This side actually looks a little better than the other side. I'm starting to think that this airplane is going to look a lot better if it's painted than if it's bare aluminum. It's just too hard with this thin sheet metal to not get some waviness when you're riveting things Even just the angle at which you pull the pop rivet in the end can you know, torque the skin just a little bit one way or the other. So you know, it looks all right. I'm just not thrilled with it when you get a reflection off of it, and you can kind of see a little bit, especially on this rivet right here. I got a little bit of a warp. It just doesn't look as smooth as you'd like to be. And of course, it's only when light reflects off of it in the right direction. But anyway, it looks good. Frame 3 is done. So I just got to clean out my metal shavings in here. But yeah, this looks good. I'm going to call this frame complete.